This is, just for the record, this is an interview with,
Mark Bangert,
and spelled first and last.
M-A-R-K. Last name is B-A-N-G-E-R-T.
And I know you're retired, but what, as I put a title underneath, the
Yeah,
art form demands some title.
John H. Teachin, Professor of Pastoral Theology, Worship and Church Music Emeritus. That's official.
Like Ralph Klein, the story of Seminex is in the name of your title. It's,
Yes, it is.
you know, talk about, how is that? I mean,
Well, it was back in St. Louis when Seminex was in its heyday. It was probably already going for 10 years. I would think this would be around the mid-'80s. No, it wouldn't be mid-'80s. Maybe late 70s, early 80s. They set up a chair under John Teachin's name. And by the time I got here, there was not enough money in that account to actually fund the professor. But I think by around 1994, 95 or so, there was enough money that they could begin to pay part of my salary. And so I was chosen the first one, actually. I'm very proud of that. First one to be a John H. Teachin professor of something or another. And that's how I got my name. I've been very proud of that.
describe John Teachin to an audience who, it's been 40 years since Seminex, and he's been gone now almost a decade. Describe him to us.
John H. Teachin was a very energetic person and a very pastoral person and a good theologian. But he wasn't the kind of theologian that sat in his study and wrote books and wrote articles. He was the kind of person that knew theology very well, Lutheran theology and beyond that as well, and put it to work pastorally. And that was one of the reasons why he was such a wonderful choice at the seminary for president. And I think it's why he was able to get that rather diverse faculty of some 60 people together, to bring it together in a way that is quite marvelous now when you look back at it. He was very personable. He was very much a family man. He loved his family and would take time to spend with all of his kids. He was very proud of them. And he was the kind of person that when Seminex, for instance, had their spring picnics or fall picnics, he was right out there on the baseball diamond cheering on and being part of the team. So he was a wonderful person. As the Germans would say, he's a Mensch. You know, he's a man. He's a human being fully. But he had tremendous love of the church, love of the gospel, and a commitment to things being right. He was always very fair to people. And when he saw something that was not quite right or that was shady, he called it for what it was. He was not afraid to do that.
In hindsight, one can look back on events of the early 1970s and almost see that there was going to be trouble with his election, which coincided with another election. Talk about that.
Well, that's a little strange in terms of my experience with that. He was elected in '69, and I had a study leave scheduled that started in 1971. So I experienced his presidency for the first 2 years. And his first year of presidency, of course, is a kind of honeymoon type of thing, where he was trying to figure out how everything worked, and we were trying to be nice to him. Second year, he began to, steer this thing a little bit, and then the rumblings were beginning already at that point. And in '71, for 2 years, I left. I went to the Twin Cities. And part of the study leave, I was told, as a matter of fact, that for a study leave like a sabbatical, leave us behind. Go do what you're supposed to do, which is what I did. And so there was a lot of what was going on during those 2 very important years, '71 to '73, that I was not a part of. And when I did finally come back in the fall of '73, I remember pulling on campus with a truck and unloading my furnishings And as I was doing that, John Teachin came walking by and said, "Welcome back. By the way, there's a faculty meeting in an hour. I want you there." So, and that was one of the meetings that was already addressing the things that were happening. So
You were interviewed by the fact-finding committee. Is that what it was called?
yes.
Describe that day, what your thoughts were, and what was that like?
Well, it was. I need to say first of all that these interviews for the faculty had a kind of progression to them. The first one of those that they did was with John Teachin. And then they took some of the other key players from the faculty, and then some of us who were younger faculty and a little bit more inexperienced were down the line. Well, as soon as someone was interviewed, several days later, before there was another batch, the people that already had been interviewed would get together with those about to be interviewed, and they would give us information on how to what to expect and how to answer questions. And I remember one of the pieces of advice that I got was, if there's a question that you can answer with either yes or no, do it. Don't explain. And so I took that to heart. But at any rate,
That's what they tell you in a court of law.
yeah, that's right. That's right. I was approached it with a bit of trepidation, not knowing what to expect. I knew several of the people on the committee, so I felt pretty good about that and trusted them some. I knew that they weren't necessarily after me. There was nothing controversial about me, at least that they knew. And I was fortunate enough to take a lay person with me as a very good friend, and that was also helpful. But they asked questions, and one of the first questions that they asked, for instance, was, do you believe in the inspiration of the scriptures? And I said, yes. They wanted more, and then they hemmed and hawed, and then they would do other things like that. And finally, they ran out of questions. There was a couple of things that they wanted to spend a little time with. I think it was the third use of the law, and we had a little discussion about that. But then they didn't know what to ask anymore, so they were asking really dumb questions. And the one that I can remember is, what did I think about Jesus Christ Superstar? Because they've got into music, And so we talked a bit about that. And then they wanted to know about the general shape of church music in the church. And it just went on and on. It was silly. I mean, it was just absolutely silly. The Missouri Synod lives by this myth that it has an ordained clergy and teachers as well that all agree on a certain amount of theological truth. I mean, that's the assumption that they have. And seminary education was geared towards that. I mean, what you did was try to prepare students that would make this affirmation about certain specific theological propositions. And everybody had to say them the same way and understand them the same way. That's the myth that they lived by. And it's the myth under which this fact-finding committee was established. The fact of the matter is that never was the case. Not in the Missouri Synod, never was that case in the Christian church, which is a good thing. I mean, we all have our own views on theological truths, and we share them and bring them together.
My sense is that you didn't ask for this fight, but you showed up and unpacked your belongings, and there I was in front of you. I mean, what were your thoughts going through this? Or were you cheering, bring it on, or were you like, oh my God, how am I going to pay my mortgage?
At first, I was somewhat naive. I thought that this thing could be solved. I was more or less at first a kind of a pacifist, like, okay, let's give them what they want and say the right things, and let's move on and do what we want to do. And what I wanted to do was to get back in the classroom and start teaching, particularly in the area of church music. We had grandiose ideas of what our worship department was going to be like after I got back from this study leave. And all of that was starting to implode and crumble around me. And then after a while, I began to detect firsthand the evil that was going on there, that was prompting all of this. Then I became somewhat worried. I was in daily contact with my brother who lived in Wisconsin. And we were on the phone. That was an expense. I mean, at that time, long distance calls could cost money. But we were on the phone every day for probably 4 or 5 months as this thing unfolded. And one of the good things that kept us all together was a community of the professors and the professors' families, but also the students. In the 1 month, there are 2 months there, January and February of '74. Almost every night, because I lived on campus, almost every night there was at least a half a dozen students that would come over after dinner. They'd bring popcorn and a couple 6-packs, and we'd sit around. I mean, it was this camaraderie of students and faculty that things unfolded, and it was the church in operation. It was the body of Christ in operation as we embraced one another for this onslaught.
The divide in American Christianity over issues of higher criticism occurred in the 10s and 20s and 1930s. It seemed to miss American Lutheranism.
Yeah.
Why did it wait? Why did this controversy wait until 1974 to blow up?
Well, I think partly because in the Missouri Synod, at least, as I was saying before, there was this loyalty to the confessions and to the scriptures. And there was the thought that this is a solid kind of theological system that had ramparts that just were too strong for the onslaught of the higher critical method. And that was one reason. Second reason was we had a clergy and a scholarly community of teachers that were mostly trained internally. So there was just a kind of recycling of things. And it was only in the 40s, I think, I may have the dates wrong, but it was in the 40s that a couple of seminary professors started to be educated outside of the system. Interestingly enough, the first one of those was Walter A. Meyer, who was the noted speaker of the Lutheran Hour. And then there were more and more, and as they came back, then you had the makings of an explosion.
How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've...
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I know there's more to the story than personalities, but for an audience that doesn't know, Jack Preuss. Who was Jack Preuss?
He's an interloper. You know, he didn't bear a Missouri Synod name for one thing, and that's a little bit of sour grapes, obviously. But Jack Preuss, I didn't know very well, actually. We would run into him occasionally. He was elected. When was he? Was it '69? Yeah, he was elected in Denver.
Yeah, it coincides with Tietjen's election.
Right. So, I knew a little bit about him from a distance, and he would come and visit the faculty there those 2 years before I went on leave. But other than that, I didn't know him. I actually knew his brother better because his brother was a backyard neighbor of mine. As I said earlier, his brother Bob, his daughter Solveig was our babysitter. And I remember the tearful time we had in the midst of all this when Solveig came into our kitchen and said that she couldn't babysit anymore for us. And she was in tears because she loved our children and our children loved her. But I knew Bob a little bit better because we would have these backyard exchanges when he was cutting lawn and I was cutting lawn. It was a tight-knit family. And I think Jack Preuss brought into the Missouri Synod two things. First of all, a branch of Lutheranism that was not necessarily at home within the Missouri Synod. And he also brought a very sharp sense of politics his father, as you know, was governor of Minnesota. And so he grew up in the midst of politics. And I think Jack just figured that that's the way it worked everywhere. And he didn't have any kind of moral compunctions for some of the things that he did. I can recall that, it was several weeks after we got our notice in my mailbox that we had to vacate our house in 2 weeks. After seeing that, I was flying out for a meeting in Philadelphia, and I ran across Jack at the airport at Lambert Field, and he was just all slap happy. He would slap me on the back. How you doing? Good to see you. All everything. This is 2 weeks after he's engineered the fact that I've got to be out of my house. It just this stuff just didn't connect for him. So he's an interesting character.
What are the takeaways from the whole story? I'm thinking, as we look back now some 40 years, where's the gospel in all of this?
Well, obviously, the gospel is that God was working something here. I really do believe that God was working something here for God's church in America, and I'd like to see some of that spilling out in terms of what the ELCA is. John Teachin, as you well know, had a vision for Lutheran unity early on. And I think it came about, but not the way that he necessarily saw that. And I think that unified Lutheran voice is a very important voice still today. And I believe that was part of God's working. In spite of all of the difficulties and pain and heartache that it caused along the way. I think that it enabled all of us, myself included, to take a much closer look at what the gospel is really about, and if you take it seriously, what does it mean? What are its implications? I think much differently about that now than I did in 1967, for instance. And it was a learning experience for me. I learned from my colleagues, and we all learned from one another. The other gospel part about it is that we all learned how to trust in times of great need. And we saw
no net.
No net. There was no net. So there was that involved. On a negative side, I'd like to repeat something that John Teachin said somewhere along the way. I think it was in the 80s. Somebody asked him about church organizations, and he said, the church cannot exist without some sort of ecclesiastical organization. And all organizations are potentially and actually sinful. And so any organization you get into is going to be having difficulties. But when those difficulties finally come slap up against the gospel, then one needs to make a stand and say the gospel's got to trump this. And so I've learned that too. I've learned not to expect too much out of ecclesiastical organizations. They are going to be fraught with difficulty, and sometimes they will try to stifle the gospel and to snuff it out, and then one needs to make a stand.
It's interesting that Teachin told me when I interviewed him, he wanted the name of the new Lutheran church to be the Evangelical Catholic Church in America, and of course was voted down resoundingly. But looking back, that that may have had tracks to it.
Yes.
And I knew that's that ecumenical thing that he was thinking about.
Exactly. Lutheran unity was first for him, but it was beyond that. Beyond all that.
Anything you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. Just an interesting tidbit, which
I'm glad you didn't answer my questions with the way you did with the fact-finding committee, yes or no.
Yes or no. An interesting tidbit which keeps showing up in books, and I think I know a piece of truth here. That's just a tidbit. the one crucial meeting of the faculty, I don't even remember what day that was, when we got together with the faculty and also the mission staff from LCMS. They came and met with us when we all made our stand and said, yes, we were going to go ahead with this, or no, we weren't going to do something or another. And the 5 minority faculty walked out of that meeting. That's when everybody raised and held the hands and sang the church's one foundation. And the tidbit is in the books is that somebody was playing that on the carillon just before that or during it or something. What actually happened is that I was in charge of the carillon, and somebody, Carolyn Muir, was visiting the campus, and I was up there with him showing them the carillon. I wanted to get down to the meeting, and he said, "Can I play something?" I said, "Yeah, play anything you want." And he played the church's one foundation. I mean, it was just happened to be that way.